Over 40 years ago, President John Kennedy had a vision of sending a man to the moon and bringing him home again. And that vision fueled a massive investment by this nation at all levels of education, and it drove decades of discovery, innovation, and economic growth, allowing America to become the world's strongest economy and lead the community of nations for generations. Sadly, that investment has fallen off over the last years. With the report, A Nation at Risk, America woke up and saw an education system that no longer served all its children and was failing our future. 6 years ago, we decided to do something bold about it. We made a decision as a nation to raise our expectations and standards for what our schools and our children could achieve. Today, 5.5 years later, after the enactment of No Child Left Behind, has brought some positive changes. For example, a recent Center on Education Policy study found gains of students in reading and math proficiency and the narrowing of the achievement gap among groups of students since implementation. There are more qualified teachers in the classroom. And finally, the law has provoked an energetic and national debate about our nation's system of public education and the need for a next generation of investment in our schools, students, principals, and teachers. But let me be clear, though, we didn't get it all right. Throughout our communities and schools today, the American people have a very strong sense that No Child Left Behind is not fair, it is not flexible, and it is not funded, and they are not wrong. So what are we going to do next? America needs and must have an education law that insists on accountability with high expectations, high standards, and high-quality assessments and proper funding. And America must have an education law that treats schools and children fairly, that provides educators and administrators the flexibility they need to meet these standards, and that delivers to schools the resources they need to improve and succeed. We can and we must meet both of these objectives in the next stage of education reform in the United States. My vision for this next bill is to take America's education policy in a new direction. First, the legislation will provide much-needed fairness and flexibility. Many Americans do not believe that the success of our students or of our schools can be measured by one test administered on one day, and I agree with them. This is not fair. We hear concerns that the law has forced schools to focus on math and reading instruction at the expense of history, art, social studies, music, and physical education. Our bill will continue to hold schools accountable for all students, including minority and low-income students, students learning English, and those with disabilities. The legislation we will introduce will contain a growth model that gives credit to states and schools for progress that these schools make over time. Our legislation will continue to place strong emphasis on the annual assessments for reading and math skills, but allow states to use more than their reading and math test results to determine how well schools and students are doing. We will allow additional valid and reliable measures to be used to assess student learning and school performance more fairly, comprehensively, and accurately. The legislation will also drive improvements in the quality and the appropriateness of the tests used for accountability. This is especially important for English language learners, students with disabilities who deserve to be given tests that are fair and appropriate. Second, the legislation will encourage a rich and challenging learning environment, and it will promote best practices and innovation taking place in schools throughout the country. In so many meetings that I attend in my district and across the country, employers say that the high school students are not prepared for the workplace, and the colleges tell us that the high school students are not ready for the college classroom. This is simply unacceptable. In the bill, we will ask employers and the colleges to come together as stakeholders with the state educators to jointly develop more rigorous standards that meets the demands of both of these groups. Many states have already started this process. We seek to build and complement on the work that our nation governors and provide them with incentives to continue their work. Therefore, the bill will say that if states take this step to commit to the students of their state, that they will prepare them for the universities and the jobs of the future, we will provide them with incentives to do so. Third, the legislation will support teachers and principals. Even with all of these changes, we will not meet our national goal of closing the achievement gap until and unless we close the teacher quality gap. All children deserve their fair share of teacher talent and expertise. We must do more to ensure that poor and minority students are taught by teachers with expertise in the subject matters in which they're teaching. I have heard from so many teachers who feel they are no longer viewed as critical partners in an educational system, but merely the instrument to satisfy minimum attainment goals. As a nation, we are not offering teachers the respect and the support they deserve today, and as a result, we are facing a very real teacher shortage crisis. For this reason, the legislation I will introduce will provide for performance pay for teachers and principals based upon fair and proven models, teacher mentoring and teacher career ladders. Fourth, the legislation will continue to hold schools accountable. Under current law, schools whose students have not made adequate achievement gains are treated the same under the law today, with the same interventions and sanctions taking place over the same period of time. We need to distinguish between schools, their problems, their needs, and directed reforms and assistance. Schools with specific problems in specific areas should be allowed to use instructional interventions that are appropriate to their needs. High-priority schools, meanwhile, must receive more intensive support and assistance. And fifth, the legislation will join the effort to improve America's high schools. We must be part of the solution to addressing our unacceptably high dropout rate. Over 30% of all high school students do not receive a diploma. America is better than that, and we can no longer give up on these students by allowing them to give up on school. Sixth and finally, the legislation will invest in our schools. This new direction for education in America is predicated on the premise that there is a growing consensus in this country that there is a need for greater and sustained investment in American education. The Democratic leadership in this new Congress has started this new era of investment in this session, beginning with the continuing resolution funding in the first part of the session, the appropriations bill under consideration now, the Innovation and Competitiveness Agenda, and the College Cost Reduction Act. I expect this legislation will follow suit. Social and economic opportunities begin in the classroom. Discovery and innovation begins in the classroom. Economic growth and economic disparity begin in the classroom. That is why it is essential that we have a high-quality and engaged education system for the continuous redeeming of America's promise of equality for all people to fully participate in this thriving democratic system.